Welcome back to the Teddy Roosevelt lecture series. This is part two. If you ended up not seeing the first part of the Teddy Roosevelt lecture series, part one, I'd recommend you go back and watch that one first. This one's going to be a little bit unlike any of the other notes that I'm doing in this class. Whenever I do like a biographical profile of somebody, you'll be seeing the slideshow in the background, but I basically use it as pictures, and I have very little text or writing. However, just a reminder that I will have stuff pop up on quizzes or on the quarter one exam that would apply to or tie into Teddy Roosevelt. But the way I incentivize you watching these all the way through is I will give you little tidbits as you go through and watch it and tell you to write it down and put it into your notes. So that's kind of a reward for the people that actually do sit down and watch through the whole thing. Hopefully you find it interesting and engaging too. In part one, just kind of to sum up, basically I didn't get too much into Teddy Roosevelt other than he came from a rich family. He was a kind of sickly, nerdy little kid who got bullied and beat up quite a bit. He had bad asthma, really looked up to his parents, but the doctors didn't expect him to live that long because he was in very poor health as a kid. So moving on a little bit, now getting into Teddy Roosevelt in his high school and college years, sort of adolescence, picking up around the time basically where he was about the same age you guys are. He went to prep school. Now, most people in America, they typically didn't get a high school education back in this era. Very, very few people got a college education. But remember, he came from a super wealthy family. So, and also because he was sickly and stuff, he was encouraged by his parents and by the family doctor to really throw himself into academics. And it was man, you don't want to be out playing with the other kids. You're going to get hurt and banged up. You don't want to be out in nature. Something's going to kill you and take you out. So we better keep you safe inside. And because of that, he really did throw himself into essentially book learning and research. And he loved studying the natural world too. So when he could, he would get outside and do all kinds of science experiments and stuff outside. But I guess he was a very, very intelligent young man. And because his family's wealthy, he's getting a top-notch education where he had family tutors coming in, teaching him, but he also did go and attend school. So high school years, I guess he was still kind of nerdy and got bullied somewhat. Remember his younger brother, Elliot, who you can see. Let me move this. You can't see a lot of that picture, but down low, that's Teddy Roosevelt sitting, and that's his brother, Elliot. When they would have been about college age or so, I guess they liked to go out and get in nature and do hunting trips, and they were pretty close and tight together. Elliot would often stand up for him and protect him from the neighborhood bullies. Well, Roosevelt started getting into sports. Now, I said he loved and idolized his dad. His dad passes away when he's a pretty young man, and he's heartbroken because of that, because he thought his dad was just the perfect guy, the epitome of manliness. And he felt man, I'll never be able to live up to that shadow that my dad is casting. I'm never going to be quite the man that he was. Part of the way they got bonded so much as a kid, his mom was always overprotective and wanting to keep Teddy inside. And he loved his mom very much too. But his dad would be I don't care what the doctors say, or I know your mom's a worrywart. Get out there and get tough. It's mind over matter. If you go out and you will yourself into being a tough guy, if you go out and lift weights and play sports and be active in this stuff, you might not be the best out there at it, but you can get through this sickliness and you can make yourself into a tougher person. Well, Teddy starts to believe in that stuff. He starts engaging in sports, and he's not that good of an athlete, but he starts playing football. He gets beat up a lot. He gets into boxing and wrestling. He's not one of the best athletes. He gets his nose broken a bunch of times throughout his life. He's always getting beat up and stuff, but he was tenacious, I guess. He kept coming back for more. So I don't care how you put that in your notes, but that would be a kind of a key thing to put in, that Roosevelt very much had it instilled in him, that it's mind over matter, that you can will yourself to being healthier and tougher and better, and that he was very tenacious. I'd put that in there too, that he just would keep coming back for more. It didn't matter how bad he got beat up or how, what happened to him. He constantly was ready to go again. That's true right on into college. So he goes to Harvard University, which Harvard has produced more American presidents than any other college in America. You had to be super wealthy and elite to go go to college, go to Harvard, especially back in that day, but the Roosevelts were. So when he goes to college, like you read accounts or hear what people had said that were his classmates, he was kind of an outcast. He was still a weird, nerdy, kind of geeky dude that was always doing science experiments and stuff. He was very good and like at academics and very smart. Got good grades and all that, and was constantly writing research papers and different things like that, where he was, looking into the natural world and doing historical research. He was really into history too. At the same time, he got on the Harvard football team. And like college football back then was nothing like it is today. Back then, there was no face masks. It was leather helmets. They didn't have the forward pass yet. We'll get more into like how Teddy Roosevelt really impacted the game of football later on, because he does that when he's president. But it was almost more like a rugby back then, where two teams of guys from two different colleges would go out there into this little mud pit, and they'd have a little leather pigskin, and they basically have a brawl out there, like it was all running backs, and you're just trying to tackle the guy that's running the ball. So I guess he got hurt and banged up quite a bit. And that was the thing that kind of made him accepted, because like he was kind of an outcast because of his personality quirks and just how he was, and as a student in college. But all like the jocks, the cool kids, the bro crowd, they accepted him and started to like him, because even though he wasn't a great athlete, he kept coming back for more, and they knew he was like really, really a tough person. So that kind of won most of the people over, whether you liked him or hated him, which a lot of people throughout his life are on both sides of that. He had a lot of people that didn't like him for a lot of reasons, and a lot of people that are huge fans of him, kind of like I am. But I think even his worst enemies would say, man, he's a tough dude. You'd have to give that to him. So I'd put that in there too, that he just has a really he's physically and mentally tough. Initially not physically tough, but he develops that throughout his life, and he stays very physically active. He grows out of his asthma. So he had terrible asthma attacks when he was a young kid. Part of how he bonded really close with his dad encouraged him to get outside, but sometimes he would have a horrible asthma attack and he would be gasping for breath, feeling like he's going to die. And like the natural tendency, if you can't breathe, you start freaking out. And I guess his dad would when he would catch that happening and see it in an early phase, his dad would grab him up and hold him down on the floor. And this is when he's a little younger, but would calm him down. And they really bonded through experiences like that. And his dad worked with him a lot on man, you can beat this asthma. Now, medical technology and science and all that was nothing like it is today. They didn't have good asthma treatments back then. But the point of the story is here, he did outgrow it. And Roosevelt, in his own mind, always thought it was his dad's advice, that he just going out there and being tough and being physically active, that'll help me beat my asthma. In reality, it's actually very common for a lot of kids that have asthma at a young age to grow out of it as they get older. It was probably a combination of the two things, that he was being very healthy and active and getting outside and getting the fresh air a lot and pushing his lungs and out running and exercising, and he probably outgrew it. So that's kind of through his college years. He ends up graduating from Harvard. His dad passes away, which breaks his heart. He always felt like his dad was a perfect dude, except for one thing. He had taken, if you remember from part one, he had taken a deferment in the Civil War when he was a young man. And he felt like that was the one mistake my dad made in life, that it kind of smudged the family honor, that all true Roosevelts, like true Americans, love a fight and they should be there for their country. And my dad one might say, he took the coward's way out. He was a wealthy man and paid for somebody else to go in. So Roosevelt's constantly looking for a chance to redeem the family honor. Now, Roosevelt wasn't born during the Civil War. That was when his dad was younger. And we really hadn't been in any wars yet, but that whole psychological aspect of Roosevelt's going to come into play really soon. So Roosevelt's dad had passed away. He's graduated from Harvard. He's a young man. He ends up getting married to the woman you see on the screen right there. I fell madly in love with her. They were super close. They had a very much loving relationship. And he ends up deciding that he wants to get into politics. Now, a key thing here, it was not common for wealthy, really powerful industrialists, people from the upper class, to get into politics back then. Politics was seen as oh, that's a dirty mudslinging game. Who would want to go into politics? Think guys like Henry Ford or John Rockefeller, Andrew Carnegie, they're super rich. They have way more money than you could make as like president. And they also probably had more power because guys that had incredible amounts of wealth like that, they bought politicians. Corruption was rampant. Politicians were often like on the payroll of these wealthy industrialists and the powerful elites in America. But like guys like Henry Ford, they don't want to become president. They want to know the president, though, and they want to lobby Congress, and they want to have all those guys in their pockets so that they can pass laws that'll benefit them so they can make even more money. Roosevelt wasn't as wealthy as any of those guys I just mentioned, but he never would have had to work in his whole life. He could have just lived off of the family savings. And when he says he's going to go into politics, everybody in his personal life, his mom, his wife, all of his close college buddies, his brother Elliot, they all discourage it and say, you don't want to do that, Teddy. You come from a wealthy family. You're one of the elites. You know what I mean? You don't even want to get into the dirty muck and mire in the trenches of politics. But Roosevelt is a very stubborn guy throughout his whole life. And he listens to other people and wants to learn from other people. But if he had his mind convinced that he was going to do something, nobody could ever talk him out of it. And that's going to be true for the whole life of Teddy Roosevelt. So he does get into politics. He campaigns. Now, he's not a nationally known person by any stretch back then. The Roosevelts are a wealthy, powerful family, but it's not like they're like Henry Ford or John Rockefeller, wealthy and powerful, where those guys would have been worth hundreds of billions in today's money. The Roosevelt family, they might be worth like 100 million in today's money. So pretty wealthy, but not at that, super high level. When he's 25 years old, which that's the minimum age requirement to run in a state legislature or to be in Congress, he runs for the New York state legislature. He's part of the New York Roosevelts. There's another branch of the family that lives in Massachusetts, but he was out of the New York Roosevelts. So he ends up running. He, to this day, is the youngest person ever elected to the New York state legislature. Like they're kind of like House of Representatives in the state. And he shakes things up right away because here's another thing that you'd want to know kind of from progressive era stuff that would apply to a couple of the quizzes and tests we got coming up. Politics was super corrupt at the beginning of this era. All politicians, not all, but a vast majority were corrupt, and they took bribes, and they just did whatever the party bosses told them to do, and they would get kickbacks and get money. Now, Roosevelt, he doesn't need money. So bribes don't mean a whole lot to him because he's already from a wealthy family. And he actually, this is another thing that I'd put in there about Teddy Roosevelt, he was offended by corruption. He had a clear sense of right and wrong in his mind. And he hated seeing like the American people or common workers getting taken advantage of, even though he wasn't a common average worker. He had a respect for those kind of people. And he was going to use his power and influence to go in there and shake things up and try to weed out like corruption in the state government of New York. Now, he was a Republican. Both sides had a lot of corruption going on back then. At this time, New York was controlled by the Republicans. And the Republican Party boss absolutely hated Teddy Roosevelt because when the boss would come in and say, all of us Republicans are voting for a certain bill, if Roosevelt didn't believe in it, he would be the one Republican that would like go away and vote with the Democrats, or he would even have the audacity to convince other Republicans in the party to break from the party ranks and do that. So he made trouble for his own party bosses, which won him, no friends in the New York legislature, and even the governor didn't like him. He was very outspoken and articulate. I guess he was good in front of a crowd, and he would go out and talk to common people and talk about things that would be like common sense reforms and, these changes. And this is a time of change. It's kind of the beginning of the progressive era when he starts to get into politics. So he really shakes things up. He starts climbing through the ranks. He's like, there's no way he's going to be bought or sold. He ends up becoming a New York police commissioner for a while. And when the police department actually at that time was pretty corrupt too. Let me shrink my face here on the screen, but there's a political cartoon of Roosevelt where the policemen actually in certain precincts went on strike, and because they wanted to get higher wages, and he thought that, no, this is just like your unions being corrupt and you already are getting paid fair. He didn't meet their demands. So the police officers went on strike and stopped going out and patrolling. Well, Roosevelt unlike any other commissioner or state legislature somebody in his position would do, he actually suited up like a policeman and went out and patrolled the streets. Now, could he patrol all of New York City? Well, of course not. He's one man. But the point is, very few people in his position would be willing to go like put their safety on the line and go out there and arrest thugs and crooks and stuff. And he actually fired a couple of police like captains, like these high ranking police officers that had been taking bribes and stuff. And he cans them and gets them out of there and starts cleaning up the police department. And he was out there actually patrolling the streets by himself. So things like that, I don't care how you sum that up in his notes, but like him going out on patrol and really like weeding out corruption, that makes him super popular with the common man. So you'd want to have that about Teddy Roosevelt, that he's very popular right from the get-go with average people, with working class people, even though he comes from a wealthy family. Another thing that I think you should put in about him, many people regarded him as a class traitor. Like he was a traitor to his social class, that he's one of the rich guys. And it's like, hey, man, the way the system's running, it's all corrupt and we're making money and we're doing really good. Why do you spend so much time like arguing and going to bat for the common guy, the little guy, the poor people, the immigrants? Why are you doing that? And I think the answer, hindsight, looking back on it through history, is kind of simple. He was a very moral guy and very ethical, and he had a clear sense of what was right and wrong, and corruption was bad, and politicians should do right by the people, which, yeah, I mean, who doesn't agree with that? But at the time, that was very uncommon. So he's regarded as a class traitor, that he turns against the rich people and advocates for the average poor people. So that's a weird situation where average poor people, they know he's rich and they know that he comes with a silver spoon and with a wealthy family, but yet they liked him and accepted him because they could see that he was out there and had their back, and he's cleaning up corruption, cleaning up the police department, cleaning up the state legislature, and exposing bad things that were happening. And that made him very endearing to the average person out there. Now, he's been in the legislature a few years. He's on the uptick. He's hated by the party bosses. He's hated by the leaders of the Republican Party, and he was a Republican too, but he's loved by average people. Things are going good. He's trending up. And then tragedy strikes his life. This is something you'd want to put in there too that profoundly impacts him in the years ahead. His wife delivers their first child, a daughter named Alice. Within about 2 days of that, she got a bad fever. Like, childbirth was pretty risky back then. You didn't give birth, if you remember my fact sheet, like in hospitals. Even wealthy people usually didn't do that. They would deliver in the home. And if you were wealthy enough, maybe you had a doctor come out and check on the wife, which the Roosevelts did. But like in this case, there was nothing they could do for her. She developed a really bad fever, got very sick after childbirth, and within 2 days of delivering Alice, their daughter, she passed away and died. Roosevelt was actually out of town when that happened, but he was on his way back in. And then he got to her, like, I think right before she passed away, and was able to spend his final moments with her. And then check this out. Just through random bad luck, his mom ends up dying of kidney failure like 12 hours later. Now, he was super close to his mom. His dad had passed away like 10 years before this, but now he's lost both his parents. He loses his wife. He loses his mom and his wife, the mother of his new child, all within a 1-day period. Roosevelt went into a deep and profound depression. So that's a key thing about his life. He loses his mom and wife like in a 1-day period, kind of unexpectedly for both of them. So it's not like they had been ill for months and months and then he saw it coming. It was like, bam, they just all of a sudden are gone. And he sinks into a horrible, like they called it a melancholy at the time, but today we would just say he was depressed. He gets a horrible depression. Throughout his whole life, Roosevelt has highs and lows. He's like, today, maybe they would have said he was like bipolar. He would bounce back and forth, and he'd have horrible bouts of depression at various times in his life. This is the first really, really bad kind of depressed period that he enters into. And you can see kind of for good reason. I mean, if you lose the two people you care about the most in the world all on the same day, man, that's going to mess you up psychologically a little bit. After that, he just doesn't feel like he just can't go on with the day-to-day business of being a politician. So he resigns his post. He ends up leaving the New York legislature and he's super rich, right? He's got this young daughter who's like days at this point now, like a couple months old. But he typically back then, it's the wife, the mom, is going to be the one that takes care of kids, especially while they're young. Roosevelt is like, I know nothing about caring for a baby girl. So this is something that maybe, I don't know, isn't the best aspect of his personality, but he makes sure she's taken care of, but he pawns her off essentially on relatives. He finds her a place to be. And he's like, I honestly, how depressed I am, and me just being a guy that knows nothing about raising babies, I can't deal with this right now. He takes a big chunk of his family fortune and he moves out west. So let's get on to our next slide here. Here we go. Teddy Roosevelt goes out west and he wants to become a cowboy, and he buys hundreds and hundreds, I think even up into 1,000+ head of cattle, all these steers. He's going to go out west and be a cowboy. Now, wealthy people at this time often would invest in beef and cattle. That's not necessarily uncommon. What is super uncommon for Teddy Roosevelt is that he goes out and actually is going to manage the herd. He's going to go out there and learn to be a cowboy himself. Now, look at the pictures of him I have up on the screen here. Check this one out. That looks like somebody who's dressing up for Halloween as a frontiersman. He's got the fine leathers on, the frilly little stuff, the big dagger in his belt, a nice, very like high-end repeating rifle. Do you think that's what most cowboys and frontiersmen dress like? No. So like when he goes out there and he is working with these other cowboys, because he had to hire in like legit cowboys that did that as a career. When he goes out and does that, he gets picked on at first. They're like, look at this guy. Look at this rich kid coming out here thinking he's going to play cowboy and, do all the stuff that we do and be a rough and tumble dude. They made fun of him. They picked on him a little bit. They were like, oh man, rich kid's coming out to, pretend he's a cowboy for a little bit. College boy coming out here with the fine, like Harvard education. He thinks he's as tough as us. Well, I guess over time, they thought he would just weed out right away, that he'd be out there for 2 weeks and then he'd call it good and say, you guys just manage my herd. I'm going back to New York. But that wasn't the case. He, a couple times got picked on for wearing glasses. Like you can see in the other photo I have up there, got called Four Eyes. And I guess he would challenge people to fights. He'd get in duels and he like beat a couple like of these tough frontiersmen up out there in fist fights. It wasn't that like he was challenging people to fights all the time, but he was kind of an abrasive, tough dude that would never shied away from a fight. And he doesn't go back to New York. He keeps learning from these cowboys. It's not like he says, we got to do it all my way. He actually is humble enough to say, I don't know a lot about being a cowboy. Teach me how to do it. And he would go out there with these, the legit cowboys, and he learned from them over months and months and months. And he's out sleeping under the stars. He's not sleeping in a nice bed with warm blankets. He goes out and lives this rough and tumble life out west. Now, he was very depressed going out there, I guess. Throughout his whole life, anytime he did get bad bouts of depression, he would go and get in nature. They didn't have any pill you could take back then. There was nothing. They didn't have treatments like that. You wouldn't go see a therapist or anything. So he had to find a way to deal with his own depression, and that was what he did. He went and got in nature, got more physically active. Now, I threw a lot of stuff at you about him going out west. I would sum that up some way that due to the bad depression, he has a big life change. He goes out west, gets a herd of cattle, and he actually becomes like a legit cowboy. And after months and months of doing that, he wins the respect of these guys. Now nobody's calling him Four Eyes. Nobody's challenging him to fist fights. Now this would have been that photo of him with looking like some Halloween costume. He wasn't dressing like that anymore. He becomes a legit cowboy, more like the other picture you're seeing over there. And I guess by all accounts, he was pretty good at it after he really picked it up and learned the ropes. Now he's out there for, I think it was about a 2-year period or so. Eventually, tragedy happens out there too, a different kind of tragedy, but there's a horrible blizzard hits one winter, and it wipes out like over half of his herd. So he loses literally, like in today's money, millions and millions of dollars. I forget exactly the proportion of it, but like just through bad luck, bad weather, he ends up losing about like half of his family fortune. When that happens, he's like, it stresses him out, and it depresses him in a whole different kind of way. And he's like, screw it. I'm packing it in and I'm going back east, and I'm going to get into politics again. Oh, there's a bell. Sorry about that. So he ends up cashing out the cows he has. He sells those out, gets the money he can get back, and he takes a really heavy loss on this. But he's going to retool, and he's going back and going to get into politics again. He's going to see his daughter again, catch up with his family. He's been gone for a couple years at this point, but now he's ready to go. And I'll leave all that for part 3, which will be coming up in the very near future. See ya.